Hello and welcome to Choose FI. Today on the show, we have a real treat. We have the return of the financial mechanic. And her episode 211 is one of the absolute most enduring episodes of our entire 600 plus episode run. And it frankly is one of the most popular of all time. And for good reason. She gave us a step-by-step script on how to negotiate your salary. And it was just an absolute revelation to me when I learned this. It was one of those things that I wish that I knew when I was 18 or 22, because it would have made a significant difference in my own life. And I know it's positively impacted hundreds of thousands of people. And she's back to give us an update, to talk about negotiating in all aspects of life and how this can benefit you, and to give a little update, actually, wonderfully, on where she's been in the last 3.5 years. And I think you're going to be really, really interested. So with that, welcome to Choose FI. All right, financial mechanic, who we're going to call mechanic because that's quite a mouthful. Welcome back to Choose FI. It's so good to have you here.
I'm so glad to be back, and I'm so glad to hear how impactful that last episode was to so many people. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it really made just a huge difference. It's a total game changer. And your episode, we had Tori Dunlap on talking about salary negotiation. We also had Chris Hutchins on talking about how to get any job. And those three episodes, that trifecta, have helped, literally tens of thousands of people, if not more. So a huge thank you for you doing that, for coming on. And the impact that you've had is you really honestly cannot imagine how many dollars of additional salary people have gotten in our community from that episode.
I love to hear it. I think it also translates to time, right? All these people are negotiating, getting this money, and now they don't have to work as long. And I love to hear it. I love to get the emails. I got a few emails telling me, yes, I negotiated. I got $5,000, $20,000, 30. People have varying degrees of success, but every little bit counts towards early retirement.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely does. And that's one thing we did talk about in that episode was getting that, even if you just do it once, the compounding benefits. I made a little joke at Jonathan's expense of if you get $5,000 more that first year, well, it's every single year. And then not only is that an additional amount that you can save, but the compounded raises on that additional 5,000 are also to your benefit. So yeah, the absolute difference from just internalizing your message can be hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars over a working career. And that's extraordinary.
Yeah, make it $1 million. It really is. There's an economist, Linda Babcock, and she says that over your lifetime, that first negotiation, generally people leave 7 to 7,500 on the table, and compounding, it ends up to be 1 to 1.5 million in their career, which also adds up, can you believe this, to 8 years of work. So that one negotiation can save you on that tail end 8 years, which is why I'm so passionate about talking about negotiation, because sometimes it's a really uncomfortable topic for people. But can you imagine that really uncomfortable week that you have negotiating can add up to 8 years of freedom on the other side, or just more time with your family, whatever it needs to be. It's amazing.
That is extraordinary. And yeah, so a little bit of discomfort because, right, I think we both, and me especially, because I know I was extraordinarily nervous and uncomfortable to salary negotiate. It feels weird. It's especially if you're not prepared. And I think that, and we're not going to talk wistfully about episode 211. We're going to get to the meat of it here. But that's really what you taught us was this is about preparation.
Absolutely.
Because when you're armed, right, with all that knowledge, well, just the practice of it, just going through the reps, you get better. It's just like anything in life. And B, when you have the information of, okay, we can make this a win-win. And hey, I looked on Glassdoor and I did this research, and this is what somebody in the job that I'm looking for is being paid. It's not that moment of, oh, so what are your salary expectations? And you've never thought of it, deer in the headlights moment. You have no idea what to do. And you kind of freak out at that point, right? But when you're armed with the knowledge, well, it's a totally different scenario. So anyway, that is what I gleaned most specifically from my own life from that episode. So a personal thank you to you, obviously, for that.
Yeah. It's as if you went to a market and you're shopping around for a banana. And if you don't know what that banana costs, it could cost $10. And somebody tells you, yeah, this banana is $10. You're going to say, well, okay. But if you know that that's a ridiculous price for a banana, you won't feel weird asking for what you know you can get at other markets or somewhere else.
Agreed. Totally agreed. It is knowledge. And that's one of the cool things we're going to talk about today is how this extends much further than just with salary negotiation. I think that's the add-on benefits of what you're teaching here. So I do want to get to your story because I think that's going to be incredibly, incredibly interesting. But since we've kind of danced around a little bit, or I've danced around some of the tips and tools, let's go back to just the high level of what we talked about last time, and maybe if there are any updates, etc. You gave us a 7-step kind of toolkit, and really it started with this is a collaboration. I think that was the biggest thing. That's not step number one, obviously, but I think that is a really important thing. I'd love for you to talk about maybe the win-win aspect of it, and then we'll go into those 7 steps.
Yeah, a lot of people think about negotiation as what am I going to get out of this situation? How do I get there? How do I get the raise? But forget that there's somebody else in that conversation with you, and they also have interests and reasons for maybe not wanting to give you that raise, or maybe they want to give it to you, but there's other aspects that they have to consider that once you know what it is, you both can come alongside and try to get the best outcome. Once you start thinking of it in that collaborative sense, it changes your whole worldview because you're, like you said, you're not just negotiating for salary or a raise, you're negotiating for your next car, you're negotiating your rent with your roommates. You want these good relationships in your life. And the more that you're coming at it with a more broad view of what does everyone want in this scenario, that's when you really can find ways, creative ways to get what you want and to build these win-win situations.
Nice. Yeah, so creative ways. That brings to my mind when you say that of, okay, maybe there are additional benefits or there are other considerations that we should be thinking of other than just the price or the salary. Is that what you meant by that? Or just give me a little flavor on that.
Yeah, there's all kinds of ways. In a job, it might be benefits like 401k or maybe working from home. But even say I got my taxes done and I really liked how he did it. He was really prompt and efficient. And I knew I would be recommending him to my friends. And I got the bill at the end. It was a little more than I was hoping for. And I said, just throwing it out there, would you give me $20 off per friend that come to you in the future? And he was interested in that. That's an example of something that I would win from and he would win from. And it's creative. It's something that businesses already do. We're not unfamiliar with this idea of referrals, but he didn't have it as part of his business. And it's okay to just bring it up as like, hey, what do you think about this? Or in a Facebook marketplace, they're selling something really high price and you say, well, I could give you this and I could pick it up today. I could pick it up in cash. Or you can think of, what about trades? Are you open to this kind of thing? And in this way, you can just get more creative with your solutions.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It reminds me of, I think, Liz from Frugal Woods way back when, in one of our very first interviews, talked about where she went to a yoga studio and it was pretty expensive every month. And I think she offered to either work the front desk or do something at a very small level where she wound up getting her membership for free or close to free. And it was just like, it was an outside the box kind of, hey, nobody's ever done this before. But I think to your point, it's what's the harm in asking? Right? There's no
Yes.
downside. It's just that little bit of discomfort. But how do you, there are many cultures where negotiating and haggling are kind of the norm. But in America, it unfortunately, it really isn't to a large degree. How do you lean into that discomfort or how do you get the reps?
That is a great question because it is something that I feel once I've traveled and I've been able to haggle in cultures where it's more acceptable, that totally changed my mindset. It really was good practice for me, but not when I think about it, not everybody can go down to Mexico or go to South America. They can't go to these places and practice these skills always, but we do in America have our jobs, which are huge yields in terms of salary, and we have buying cars and buying all these other things where we do have negotiation built in. And so we do have that cultural discomfort. And I have to say, the best thing over and over and over is practicing applying for jobs, having these conversations with recruiters every few months, every quarter. And once you get those calls in, you're always talking to somebody whose job it is to negotiate. And you get to practice using these scripts. especially if you already have a job and you're safe and maybe you don't even want a new job. That's the best time to negotiate because you can just practice. What does it feel like to ask for double my salary? Because that's really scary. It feels super weird to ask for something so high when you've been anchored to your current place. But say, it's just this company. I don't really care if I get this job. What if I just say, I'm aiming for double my salary? What do you think about that? And see what they say. In that case, you have nothing to lose.
Yeah, you talk about nothing to lose. And I think that is a really important part of this where, okay, there's no downside. I think that if we're anchoring, so it's anchoring is psychological of that's usually with a particular dollar figure. But another psychological part of this is just very simply, hey, we need to just try this. We need to not be nervous and we need to get our reps in and think about, like we're saying, what's the downside? There's very little to none. I do want to touch on that though. Are there any potential downsides to this? So if every couple months you're trying to get reps in, are you worried about like maybe getting a bad name? And this is a little outlandish because it's a big wide world. There are tens of thousands of companies probably that you could go to. But I think some people might be sitting back saying, oh, I'm worried that my current job is going to find out that I'm interviewing, or the recruiters might blacklist me because I'm wasting people's time. Like, does that ever cross your plate or your mind, or is that just totally ridiculous?
To be honest, I've never thought of it like that before. I could see it maybe if your industry is quite small, then you might want to branch out if you're doing these types of practice to a bigger industry or something like that. One thing to note is that a lot of employers are expecting their best employees could leave anytime. That's actually a good thing for you. It's a good thing in the culture of having this expectation that you might be out there looking for something else. It will also help you if you're negotiating for a raise. And then in general, you're not always wasting people's time. There is a potential that if they offer you double your salary, are you not going to consider it, for example? So you might as well, in this time of peace, just practice. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go to every single competitor. You could branch out. And like you said, it's a big, wide world. So honestly, it's not something I have exactly thought about. And I do want to acknowledge you don't want to waste people's time. You probably should be applying for jobs that maybe you could see yourself, or you'd at least consider if they put a good offer on the table, which you are negotiating for.
Right. Okay. No, that all makes sense. I'm glad you were very kind there and basically didn't say it was ridiculous, but nevertheless, I'm sure there's some other people like me that would be nervous about that. But frankly, I think after I asked the question, I realized it's just a scarcity mindset because your answer was, hey, employers expect their best employees to potentially look elsewhere because these are the best people potentially in the field. We need to keep them happy. So whereas my mindset immediately goes to old school, hey, I don't want to lose my job. I'm worried about the boss finding out about X, Y, or Z. But that's ridiculous. And that's antithetical to what we talk about in the Phi community of this open abundance mindset of I'm worth this. I can't leave this money on the table. I just can't.
Definitely. And even if you had a conversation with your boss and she said, hey, I found out you were interviewing somewhere else, you can be honest and say, yes, I've been practicing my interview skills. That's something I need to work on. I'm actually very happy here. If you are happy, you can say, I've been planning to stay here for a few more years, but it is something that I do every quarter, interviewing. I mean, you can even talk about it with a mentor, and you maybe can approve it with your boss as something that you're doing for your portfolio, interviewing. Maybe I wouldn't mention it to your boss, but to a mentor or somebody you trust.
Yeah, I like that. All right, you're expanding minds here, one podcaster at a time, and obviously a lot of listeners at a time. So this is great. All right, so this clearly is a collaborative process, and I think that's what
Mhm.
you've even tried to talk about just in the last couple of minutes. Of all right, when we're thinking about negotiation in any aspect, it's win-win. It's okay. Let's look at incentives for each particular person or party. What are they looking to get out of it, and how do we make it a win-win? And in a collaborative way and not just a zero sum game of I win, you lose. Because if you're going in with that mindset, everybody's going to lose, let's be honest. So I think when you start from this collaborative mindset, it's a lot different mentality and starting point. So let's talk about, again, your very specific kind of 7 steps. And I guess the first thing I should ask is, are we still at 7 steps? Is that roughly where you are?
Yeah, it hasn't changed. It's actually been very consistently. These 7 steps have been the most helpful. Every time I look at it, I want to add more. There is more context, but the very first step is to put off talking salary in the early stages. So this is often in the phone call. You might get a recruiter. They're not allowed to ask you exactly how much you make right now in certain states. In certain countries, they will still do that, as I experienced when I was moving abroad. But you really don't want to answer this question. You can say a few things. You can say, I need to know more about the responsibilities of the role before I feel comfortable talking about salary. You can say it's a personal policy not to discuss salary until we're at the offer stage. That is a personal policy lots of people have. You can say, I'm confident we can work out something that's fair. And my favorite, honestly, I turn it back and I ask them, what is your range at this role? What do you have budgeted? I was completely shocked how many recruiters would then just tell me. A few I had to ask a few times, a few we did that negotiation dance, but a lot of times they would ask me what my salary expectations were. I would say, can you help me understand what is the range for this role in particular before we move forward? Because as we were talking about, the goal here is to figure out for both of you, do you want to move forward? They want to know, are we offering enough to keep you? And you want to know, are you offering me enough for me to want this job? And they typically have this number in front of you, whereas your number might be a little more fuzzy or based off of what you were last making. So it's important and so awesome to ask this question. Well, what do you have budgeted? And it's often a lot higher than you might have said if you had just flat out asked this question. Also, it's a totally fair thing to say, I don't have enough information yet to tell you. So I'd like to wait until I have a little more information to tell you what my range is. So what is the next step for this process?
Oh, I love these. Yeah, it's these little gems, right? So I'm confident we can work out something fair. That's just like an absolute amazing one because everybody wants to be seen as fair, right? There's something really beautiful and impactful about that word fair, fairness. It's just like this fundamental principle of humanity is fairness. And when you're essentially calling on them to be fair and that you're willing to be fair, that just seems like an absolute winner.
Totally. I'm willing to be flexible once we get there. That's something you're kind of showing with this. And then, like you said, you're talking about fairness and that you're both reaching the same goal here.
Yeah. And so, right, put off talking about numbers, but I'm assuming there's also some aspect of this that's that anchoring as well is you don't want to be the first one to talk numbers. Like you absolutely do not want to be the first one to anchor this.
Right. Yeah. If anything, there's been a few times when they push really hard and I might throw out a really high. Again, you really don't want to give out the first word, but this is their job and they sometimes will push you. If you want to, you can throw out something that feels totally ridiculously high, but say, you know what, I'm flexible. I know that that might be out of the range of what you're looking for. That happened when I was negotiating in a different culture in the Netherlands where I knew that they pay about half of what I was making. So that if they asked me what I was making, I could be honest because it was an anchor point that was very high. And I would say at the same time, I know that this isn't what the average is for your industry, and I'm willing to be flexible and see what we can work out together.
Right. But the anchor point there is it seems very unlikely that they're going to start you at the bottom end of their range, right? It would be, okay, she's making 2x what we probably would have paid her. And maybe there's a little wiggle room to the good in that sense. So in that sense, you're using anchoring to your benefit. So I think we've got this number one. But now let's go into what's the second step of your seven.
So, number two, you already alluded to before, but that's doing your research. And this is one of the most important things. You can use tools like Glassdoor, you can hunt around. If I can give everybody a challenge, one of the most difficult but the most rewarding parts of always doing your research is asking other people in the role, if you can, if you have relationships or networking. The times when I made the most money was when I had the guts to ask friends what they were making in a similar company or a similar role. And actually, that is the origin story of me doubling my salary in the US was asking a friend who had just moved from the company we were working at to a new company, oh, what are you making there? And at first, that used to be a very uncomfortable question. I can imagine it's very uncomfortable. But now that I've gotten used to it, I've seen so much benefit from sharing the salaries. It benefits us as employees. It doesn't so much benefit the employer. And that's when you know there's a lot of value there that you can tap into. So that's a challenge I would give if it's at all possible. Doing your research also includes getting real numbers from real people. Maybe somebody left the company and you can grab coffee with them, ask them what their experience was, and say, hey, if you don't mind me asking, I'm curious what you used to make at that role, because I'm thinking about asking for a raise or a negotiation or working in a similar role. You can give me a range if you want, but I'm just curious what I should be asking for.
Yeah, that's important, especially because there is such an information asymmetry, right? When it comes to employers, employees. And in this sense, you're saying basically us employees should kind of not band together because that sounds a little more exaggerated than we're trying to make
Unionize.
it. But yeah, right. But any information that we can share, it's okay, let's normalize that, which I think is what we're trying to do in the Phi community about normalizing talking about money,
Exactly.
right? I mean, this is something that's taboo, and it's generally taboo to talk about what salary you're making, but it doesn't have to be. You just have to be, maybe you're the one that goes first, right? And brings it up and talks about it.
Exactly. That's a great strategy. That's a great inroads, just to say I'm making this much. What do you think I should be making?
Yeah, exactly. And just have that conversation. And then there are also other ways to find out a little bit of background info. I think Glassdoor and sites like that. But really, in this case, talking to somebody or multiple somebodies is going to be really, really useful, especially if you know people in exact, like you're saying, hey, this is somebody I worked with in a very similar role who just went to another company, also in a similar role, maybe the next step up or something. I can find that very specifically. And then it's much more concrete in that regard.
Exactly. And when you're flexing that muscle and maybe practicing these kinds of calls, you might get it wrong a couple times, and that's part of the practicing. And part of doing your research might be interviewing and then getting those ranges from the recruiters, like in that first step, asking what the range is. And once you've done that a few times, now you have a really good picture of what somebody in this kind of role, even if it's not the exact one, or this kind of industry, you have a little more data points. And yeah, like you said, there's Glassdoor, there's other tools to give it a little more context, and then you can go from there.
Yeah. And what you just said reminded me almost of like a there are other fish in the sea type
Hmm.
scenario. But what I mean by that is there are plenty of jobs. And I think the bedrock of what we're talking about here is scarcity versus abundance mindset. And when you have a scarcity mindset that this is the only job for me, then you're going to really bend over backwards to help them and not feel emboldened to negotiate. But when you realize there are many jobs. There are many, whatever it is. I think you had something, what is it called? BATNA, which is my best alternative to negotiated agreement. I do want to hear you talk about that, I think,
Hmm.
before we move on to step three, because it's so pertinent right here. But when you're looking for a house, there are plenty of houses. When you're looking for a car, there are plenty of cars. It's when you get emotionally attached to one of these things, then you lose all of your negotiating power, really, because you are locked in on that. My dream house, I could only move there, as opposed to saying, hey, I want to live somewhere. In my case, I want to live somewhere within this school district. And there are 2,000 houses here. That's even limiting in itself. I want to live in Richmond. There are tens upon tens of thousands of houses. Well, you're going to find a house. But if you lock in on, I need to be on that block to be happy, well, I mean, you're probably setting yourself up for unhappiness right from the beginning, right there. So let's talk about that. BADNA, is that how you'd say it?
Yeah, so you're talking about the best alternative to negotiated agreement, the BATNA, which is what will happen if you don't get this job, this house, this car, this whatever it is that you want. And oftentimes, like you said, there's an alternative. If I don't get this job, there will be more jobs. If I don't get this car, the market will provide a car. I'll just keep looking. And a lot of times people wait until it's their dream job to really get to those final stages of negotiation for a lot of the reasons you might have said. Maybe they're scared for their job. It's a lot of work to do this, but it will really help you a lot if it's not your very first time negotiating, when it's your dream job and you feel like you're kind of backed into a corner. If it is, that's okay. We can get you there. We want you to get your dream job. You can still negotiate. You can do all these things. You can put off talking salary, doing your research, knowing your worth, all these steps that we're going to get into. But it is really helpful to know, okay, it's not the end of the world. If I don't get this job, what will I do next? If I can't haggle for this banana, I can walk and go to a different market and find another banana. Maybe it won't be as ripe, but there are other bananas in the world that we can. That's kind of a silly example. You know what I mean? But like you said, that abundance mindset will really help you here because you won't be stuck on, oh no, if I don't get this job, it's the end of the world, which if it is, then yeah, it's going to be hard for you to negotiate. But if you have this open mindset, it will be a lot easier for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So right, there are alternatives. And I think that's the most important thing again with this abundance mindset. So, all right, thank you for indulging my little sidebar here. So, let's move on to the next step.
Yeah. So the next step is know your worth. This means making your resume, putting down a list of all the projects you've worked on, maybe money that you've saved the company, projects that have been really important to you. And remember that when you're taking this into your next job, that you're not just anybody applying for this job. You have the skills, you know the qualifications, and you will provide value to this company. So make sure you know that when you're going in because it really helps. On their side, they want you because of all these skills that you have. And knowing that, being able to articulate what you've done and what you can accomplish, what you hope to accomplish, that really brings extra punch to this negotiation. Maybe punch
Yes.
isn't a good word. Extra handshake to this negotiation.
Nice. I like that. And right, these are two sides and if you're as good a candidate as you believe yourself to be and that you're proving, they're going to want you. Right? Like especially if
Exactly.
you're showing, hey, like you just said, this is how I save money for the company. These are the projects that I've done. These are the skills that I have. You're showing that and you're making it this is again, yet again, I sound like a broken record, but this win-win, right? And it's not just oh, please give me a job. It's, hey, I have a lot of options here. And here's why you would want me at this company. Here's what I can bring to the table. And here's how I'll make your life easier. Here's how, whatever, fill in the blank essentially. But know your worth. That's wonderful.
Know your worth. And what you're talking about leads right into the next step, which is remember, you're not the only one negotiating. We talked about this a little, but the company has already invested time into you. They've screened you, they've contacted you, they've had to set up the meetings, they're taking time out of their employees' days to interview you. Or if it's a negotiation for a raise, the company has already invested training you, ramping you up to be productive. So there's all these ways that they've already invested into this process. And so you have to remember it's a time consuming process to find and hire a worthy candidate. If you reject their offer, they're going to have to go through it over and over again. And they know that. So that's something to keep in mind. You have similar goals. You both want somebody to fill this role. You would hope it would be you. They also hope it would be you. And because of that, remembering you are not the only one negotiating will really help your case.
Right. That's so interesting about if you're already an employee there. I mean, think about the friction for that employer. Because if you walk ultimately, right? If you come in and you're collaborative, you say, hey, this is what I'm looking for salary wise with my next raise or something like that. And they basically balk at it and say that's ridiculous. Well, think of all the friction for them. They have to then find a new employee, actually find them, train them up, get them to know the ins and outs of the job. I mean, that's what a 6 to 12 month process,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. I mean, so the opportunity cost for them is enormous in that case. But again, because so many of us are still stuck with that scarcity mindset, we think, oh no, I can't possibly rock the boat, which is why I keep saying this over and over again. And I wanted to come through is what you're doing is you're arming people with this psychological toolbox basically to win at this. And I think this is an important aspect of this is not you begging for something. You're providing an immense amount of value. And here's why, and here's what you deserve because you're worth it.
Exactly. That's what negotiation is. You nailed it.
Well, I've got a good teacher here. So let's be clear. This is not me and any kind of genius. This is all from you. So, all right, let's move on to the next one.
Well, the next step is actually negotiating. So, all of these things that we've talked about are before the negotiation. It's a screening call, it's doing your research, knowing your worth, remembering that you're not the only one negotiating. And then the next step is actually negotiating, which I find it really helpful to have some kind of script, some things you can say. It really helps because otherwise you might think negotiation is, I deserve $100,000. Please give it to me or else I will go. And you just feel very uncomfortable, don't
Not
know
very
what that
compelling.
looks like. Exactly. So now that you've done all this research, you can start with the good, right? I am excited about this opportunity. I loved hearing about this project. I love what you're doing here with this kind of work. And I know we can come and agree on a starting salary. Or, like we talked about before, I know we can agree on a fair salary. We can work together. So that's the first one. I'm excited. Next, based on the market, the research, what others are earning in this industry, standard of living, other opportunities I've been looking at, even goals I've set for myself. These are all examples of filling in the blank based on this work that I've been doing to figure out how much I deserve to be paid. I would expect to be in this range. So, knowing your worth here, knowing your research, based on all these logical elements, this is what I've been expecting. And it helps to talk in ranges. And in this particular case, you want your range to be even higher than your lowest number.
Okay, that's interesting. So the range, let's say you're looking for $100,000, but you theoretically would take the job for, I don't know, 85 or 90,000. What would that range be that you would say in this beginning negotiation point?
I love that because it goes back to this preparation. There's something in negotiation called the 3 Ws. It's the wish, the want, and your walk numbers. So your wish might be, man, how awesome would it be to make $200,000 or 150? What I want in this case, we were saying, is 100,000, maybe 85,000 to 100,000. That I'd be okay with that. And my walk number might be anything less than 85,000. I don't really want to work there. That's less than what I make, or that's less than what I've seen through my research. And I don't want to go through this whole thing again. So I'm going to walk if they say 75 to 85,000.
So, right, got it. Wish, want, walk. So we're saying in this case, in my weird hypothetical, so the wish is 150, the want is somewhere between 85 and 100, and the walk is below 85. So where in that beginning, so I would expect to be at blank to blank range. Like where would you start with that?
Yeah, it helps maybe in percentages, maybe pick something from 10 to 15% more than your want number.
Okay.
So if you would take 85,000, maybe start with 110 or 100. And sometimes it will feel so weird to ask for that much more because it feels like a really high number. I remember the first time I ever asked for 100,000 or a job that was more than 100,000 when I had been making maybe 50 to 60,000, and I felt like, well, who am I? Who am I to ask for this number? So just knowing that can be helpful. I knew going in it was going to be really weird to ask for over 100,000 when I had never made that before. And all this context you've been doing might help, but also just know it might feel weird, but don't back down. Pick that number. If you would take 80, maybe say 90 to 100 or even more. And obviously, a lot of this depends on this research that you've been doing and how much the range is in your industry. So these numbers I'm throwing out might not be applicable to you, but pick something, 10, 20% more and then go from there.
I love that. You have me ready to like run through a brick wall right now. This is awesome. Like it might feel weird, but don't back down. What a great
That's
quote,
it.
right? Like, yeah, it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel weird that first time.
That's actually one of the main feedback I've gotten from people talking to me about their negotiation is telling me, oh, this feels horrible. What do I do when I have to wait for the response? Especially now that you've asked that question in this step of negotiating, the next part is feeling extremely uncomfortable because you might have to sit in silence. They might say, okay, we'll get back to you. And now you're wondering, oh no, did I just throw it? Are they going to rescind my offer? In my case, I'm used to negotiating. I was negotiating for a job overseas, and I told my mom that I was waiting to hear back. And she said, you negotiated for that much more? Are you sure? Like, they might take it back. I don't know, financial mechanic, as my mom calls me. I don't know, mechanic, you should probably get back to them and just say you'll take that offer. And so actually, she was feeling that discomfort that I had gotten used to feeling. And what she was telling me is something I would be telling myself in those first couple negotiations that I ever did. And that's something to know, is that discomfort will come, especially to start. And it's good to be prepared for that. And it's good to know, like we said before, 1 week, even 20 minutes of discomfort will save you average of $7,000, and it could be up to $1 million over time. And so when you're thinking of that discomfort, maybe whisper to yourself, millions of dollars, millions of dollars. This is worth it. This discomfort, you will want to get out of it. We're talking about something that is very uncomfortable in society. This negotiation, like we mentioned, it's not really built into our culture. And so you will feel discomfort. And after asking as much as you can, meditate, breathe. Remember that feeling this discomfort is normal. It will be worth it. And think about, again, your alternatives. If that happens, what are your worst case scenarios? We can handle it. We are good. And we have a lot of other opportunities on the table. So that's me just telling you, you will feel discomfort and you will breathe through it and you will come out the other side.
Yeah, I think financial therapist, we might have to change your name to instead of financial mechanic, right? Because that's what this is. It's, hey, is it worth it to lean into that discomfort for, like you're saying, $7,000+ a year, which I think you said is somewhere maybe 7 or 8 years of potentially early retirement? That, okay, lean into a little bit of discomfort and know it. You know it's going to be uncomfortable. It is what it is. But again, as long as you understand there are other alternatives, this is not the only job for you. It lowers the volume on that crazy noise inside your head of, oh, you have to do what they want and you have to, like, you need to get this job. Well, what if you don't need this job? What if there are plenty of other jobs? Well, then the stress is a lot less, just dramatically less. So, all right, this is awesome. Let's I think we have just one or two more in your 7 steps here.
Yeah, the next step is negotiating is about more than salary. So we know you can negotiate bonuses, you can negotiate stock, we can negotiate relocation expenses, time off, education, even. One of the most important and critical from the last episode I remember is the sign on bonuses. And that's something, especially in tech, that you can ask for. And just by asking, I made over $10,000 just by saying, do you have a relocation bonus? The recruiter wasn't going to tell me about the sign-on bonus, but because I had had it in previous jobs, I knew, oh, is this something you do? And he said, oh yeah, we can throw in. Can you imagine? We can just throw in $10,000 just by asking. So knowing about what is important to you, and maybe you can take a little bit less salary, but you have the ability to work from home 3 days a week or what or more. What is it to you that's important, and that you might be able to make some non-traditional arrangements with your employer in exchange for salary, or maybe not in exchange for salary, maybe just as an extra benefit to you working this job.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, I'm a whole lot more likely if I can work from home 2 or 3 days a week. Okay. That's part of it. Because, yeah, I think so many people get caught up in just that number, just the top line salary number, and that's it. But as you're saying, this is multifactorial. There's so many different issues to consider, and it's all valuable. It's all potentially valuable. So, I mean, an extra week of vacation is absolutely wonderful, and there's a value to that. So, yeah, clearly. And I just love the fact that you asked for a sign on bonus and no, here's 10 grand. Sure. So do you recollect, did you ask for a relocation bonus or sign on bonus? Because I know we're talking about scripts, right? So these like very particular words, when somebody goes in and they're like, oh, hey, do you have a sign on bonus or a relocation? Like, how would you say it if you were advising?
In this case, it was a sign-on bonus. So just to sign the contract, but in this case, it is important to mention I did have to stay a year to get the sign-on bonus. So that was something. And of course, it's just for that 1 year. And then the following years, I don't get to factor that 10,000 into my salary. So it's a nice perk, but it is something where I had to know or consider that I would have to stay at that job for that amount of time. I do have a couple of other examples too of negotiations like that. One is I had a friend who worked at this company and she had a bonus of 10%. And I didn't know that I could have negotiated that bonus, and I was at 7%. And now asking for 3% more bonus might not feel like it's not really a big ask. If we're talking in percents, sometimes that's easier to ask for. Oh, I'm aiming for about 5% more. Doesn't seem as big, especially when you're talking about big numbers. So I wish and I regretted that I didn't negotiate that bonus once I learned that that was something you can do. So that's one example. Another example is I had a friend who loved going to tech conferences. He could learn about coding in different languages, and we had the budget for one a year. And he managed to negotiate going to 3 a year, and that included flights, staying in
Oh,
the
man.
hotel. And when he came back, he could share the lessons he learned from those conferences with the rest of us. And it really actually enhanced the culture at the company to let him do that. So that was a great win-win for both
Yeah.
parties in that scenario.
Yeah, what a creative thing. I mean, again, we're literally recording an hour-long podcast on negotiating and thinking outside the box. And I would have never thought of that as an option. Hey, I really want to go to an extra conference or two. Can we find room in the budget for that? And that's not just, hey, I want to go to Puerto Rico twice a year for a vacation. This is, hey, I think I can add value to the company by doing this. Can we find room in the budget for that? That's brilliant. So again, we're trying to expand our mind here with all of this. I think that's the most important thing. And that's what a great example that was. All right. So I think we're getting close to the end here. I know your sixth one is practice, which we've talked a bunch about throughout the entire episode here. So let's not get bogged down in that because I think everybody understands just how critical this is. You have to put in your reps. But what is the last of the seven here?
The last of the seven is, are you going to accept this offer? Are you going to reject this offer? And there's nuance to this because you can accept, you can say, I'm really excited about this opportunity. But if you're saying no, this is a good time to say why and being really honest about why. Maybe the commute is too long, or really the package doesn't add up to what you were hoping for. And being honest is a way, it doesn't have to be part of your negotiation, but it is a way to let that company know what it is they could do to keep you if they really want you at this stage. So being honest is critical because there might be things that they can do to keep you if you're totally honest. And also, you might see this company again, you might interview with them again. So it's good to leave on a good note and say, I really appreciate this time and effort and that you interviewed me. Unfortunately, this time it won't be working out for whatever reasons. And I'm looking forward to potentially working with you in the future. Just leaving that whole interaction with grace is so important for your career in general. Accepting because you're letting them know you're excited, and then rejecting because you're letting them know, okay, it might not be the final rejection. So that's something to keep in mind.
Right.
And you don't want to make up a reason like you don't want to say it's the commute if it's really the offer, because you're not really letting them close the gap there. And they can just say, oh, well, if the salary's not enough, oh, well, and then you leave on peaceful terms. Or maybe they say, oh, if that's what it is, then we can do something else to make it happen. And this cycle of negotiation sometimes has a few going back and forth, and it will feel like you're rejecting the offer for the final time, and it might not be the final time.
Yeah, that is critical. That's a really cool thing, right? So obviously, if you accept, you accept, but this rejecting with grace and honesty. And I think that is really been a through line of everything you've talked about here is because this is a win-win. And it should go without saying that we want to be honest at all times in our interactions with people. But I think very often, like you just said, there are these little kind of white lies that a lot of us build into our lives sometimes. Like in this case, oh, it's the commute. The commute's too long, but it was actually that I really wanted $5,000 or $10,000 more. Well, it might feel a little uncomfortable, but say, hey, it's because I really needed, and you could use whatever language you want, and I'm sure you have better language than I do, but I really needed $5,000 more. And they might come back and say, okay, well, we can do that because again, they've invested a lot of time in you already in this process. Like you said, this could be a multi-month thing just to get to that point. They've had their employees invest valuable time in chatting with you, probably touring you around the office, all this stuff. I mean, they've invested time and money in you. If it's just a couple $1,000s, that's the actual difference and that's the honest difference. Just be honest with them and you never know what happens. So that's cool that this is a circular thing, that just because you got to that point doesn't mean it's the finish line.
Exactly. I was imagining somebody who's practicing, who's actually happy at their job, and you don't want to say, oh, I was just practicing. But you might say, I'm actually happy at my current employer right now, and please keep the door open for me in the future, or something like that. Again, people know that people are interviewing and seeing what it looks like. And at this time, their offer just wasn't as attractive as your current job. And that's okay too.
Yeah, it is okay. This is great. Okay, so what an absolute wonderful overview of just something that's really truly critical. So thank you for spending so much time on this. And you said a couple times in there that you actually put this to practice on a job that you took abroad, which I think was in the Netherlands, actually.
Yes.
So this could be like a perfect kind of segue to finish up the episode with, okay, what have you been up to for the last couple of years? Because your life has changed fairly dramatically since we talked to you 3.5 years ago.
Yes, 3.5 years ago when we talked, I was still on the journey to financial independence. I think it was just 3 years ago. And since then, I've almost doubled my net worth, thanks to a lot in part negotiating. And since then, I also moved abroad. I negotiated to move abroad. And then I decided it was time to retire early. And
Nice.
so last year, at the ripe old age of 29, I managed to quit my job, travel the world, and now I'm back in Santa Barbara for now. And I'm writing about this experience on my blog, financialmechanic.com.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
And
didn't
I
mean to
see.
plug it.
Yeah, I know. I'm so glad you did. And yeah, we'll definitely put that in the show notes. Obviously, we'll also put, I know you just published a 1 year of early retirement blog post here where it looks like you did a month by month for the first 6 months of, hey, this was early retirement month one, and I was in Copenhagen and whatnot. And then just
Yep,
your travels around the world. So it's pretty neat to read up on where you've been. And then, so right, this has been about a year, but you said, so you're currently in Santa Barbara, California, which is funny because, again, I went back and listened to episode 211 recently. And at the time, I think you might have been in upstate New York and you were going to move to Santa Barbara.
that's right. Yeah, I have been moving back and forth across the country. And then I decided I took 2 years to move to Amsterdam in the Netherlands, which everyone asked me why. And I will tell you, it's such a beautiful city with bikes galore. It's very fire minded. Everyone is frugal, but also living their best life. So I highly recommend visiting there. And after 2 years, I decided to travel the world, see how much it would cost versus staying at home. And after 6 months of just a joy and delight of travel, I did decide I wanted to settle down for a little bit and then I might go travel again. Who knows? But I did travel Southeast Asia. We did New Zealand and Japan and Thailand. And it was really living the life. And at the same time, when I go back and I think, what was it? This negotiation really helped. And investing in low cost index funds, you would imagine that after a year of retirement, if I spent 20 or 30 grand a year, which that's all I spend a year, that I would be down 30,000. But I'm actually up almost 100,000 since last year of retiring. So that just goes to show I'm trying to put it into practice. I knew it would be scary and uncomfortable, just like negotiating, but I do think that taking this time off will be worth it. And I'm interested in what is next, not just my 9 to 5, but having some kind of passions to pursue where when you leave the rat race, you're leaving the rat race. You're not leaving interesting things to do and things to fill your time. I have found that most people, their response is, well, won't you be bored? I'm sure you've gotten that a lot, Brad.
Yeah.
But of course, you're not bored, are you? Like, there's so much to do and see. And I really do owe it all to fire and finding this movement in my early 20s so that when now I'm 30, I've spent 10 years accumulating and saving, and that's what it took. So I'm just really excited that you're here and you're spreading this message, and that it doesn't have to just be early 20s people who are doing this. Of course, it helps a lot if you find it earlier, but no matter what age you're finding it, that this kind of thing is possible, and negotiating might be one step to get there a little bit faster.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I mean, that encapsulates the Phi mentality and message in just a couple minutes, right? Because you're talking about, in this case, okay, it's a big wide world. I can travel, I can do things. I don't need to be just locked in on this job. So many people wrap their identities up in their jobs, and it's silly. There's so many things to do out there. And there's a quote from your article that I'm going to read here in a second. But before I get into that, it's okay, index funds. In your case, yeah, you weren't working, you weren't bringing in income, and you obviously were spending somewhere in the 20 to 25, $30,000, which is obviously a very inexpensive life, but it's still 20 to $30,000 out of your net worth with $0 of income coming in. But over the last year, your net worth has still gone up $100,000 net, even after taking that money out and spending it. And that's the beautiful thing of, hey, I have this money invested and I have a significant nest egg. There are going to be years where it grows 10 to 20%, like this past year. And in your case, obviously, big earn with sequence of return risk. I mean, things worked out pretty well for the beginning of your early retirement, which is wonderful, but it's not terribly atypical to have a year where it goes up 8, 10, 12, 15%. And if you're spending dramatically less than that, and certainly dramatically less than 4% safe withdrawal, that money, you're going to be shocked to see it just keep compounding.
Oh, yeah. And when I retired, the next couple of months was that big crash that we had. So it actually went down
Oh,
almost
wow.
$200,000 in the first few months after quitting my job and deciding to travel. And honestly, because of this podcast, Choose FI, other resources in Fire, I had this investment strategy where I knew that this is going to happen. And I could have been in my scarcity mindset and said, oh no, if I leave my job now, I will lose all my software skills. I'll probably be bored. I need more cushion. We're on the brink of, everyone was saying it was a recession and that that it's very extremely risky. And I will tell you, it doesn't seem like there will ever be a good time to retire. And 29 does feel a little early, but that was all scarcity. And if I think in abundance mindset, 29 is not too early to quit your job and start working on something that you're passionate about. It's not too early to share with others that something crazy like this, it really does feel crazy, but it's possible. And it's possible implementing these methods, negotiating for that extra 7,000 and ending up with $1 million in the end. Like, these are real numbers. It feels abstract, but I feel like I'm living it, and I want to tell other people that yes, sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it's scary, sometimes other people will have more fear than you will. In my case, my mom with that job offer, but also many other people telling me it's too early to retire, and it is a lean life that I've been living. But I was sipping mango smoothies on Thai beaches, and I didn't really have to worry about those voices. And it did bounce back, and we'll see. There's always risks involved. There might be some catastrophic thing that happens, and in that case, I'll just have to negotiate for a new job.
Wow. I love it. And yeah, it's funny because I just kind of assumed based on the timing that everything was roses based on when you left and the stock market's gone up 20%, but I had it exactly wrong. Your net worth dropped a couple $100,000 and yet you stuck with the plan. And obviously the market has come roaring back to the point
Mm-hmm.
where, again, net of all the money you've spent, you're still up a significant amount. So I mean that is extraordinary. And yeah, just I think to close it out, I'm just going to read this paragraph from your article, which is, with a plane ticket booked, retirement wasn't just the lack of work, it was the addition of adventure. I didn't have to fret about who I was without a job title or worry that I wouldn't have anything to do. For anyone struggling with retiring, I recommend treating it like a sabbatical. Take 6 months to a year off without the pressure of it being permanent. If I wanted to go back to my work after my travels, I could. Do I want to? No. That is just absolutely brilliant. And I mean, that brings us to today, really. And you are living life. You've proven this out to yourself and to so many other people. And like you said, sure, it's easier if you get started at 20, but this is a mathematical equation. And this phi is valuable and pertinent to anybody, no matter when you're starting. It doesn't matter if it's 30, 40, 50. It doesn't matter. It's a mathematical equation and it's about taking action. And you took action and it's just extraordinary. So thank you so very much for coming back on the show. I think this is really going to help a lot of people. And yeah, like we said, financialmechanic.com. Is there anywhere else that we can send people to?
My Twitter is Phi Mechanic, but my blog, financialmechanic.com, is definitely the best place. I'd love to hear anybody who uses these tips and tricks for negotiation. I'd love to hear what you're doing to build your best fire life.
I love that. So I would love for people to copy me on that email too. So brad@choosefi.com. And do you have an email or just the contact form on your website?
Yeah, my email is fm@financialmechanic.com. And there's also a contact form on the website.
Beautiful. Yeah, let us know how you took this information and took action on it. That is what it's all about. It's not just taking it in, sitting on the couch. You have to get up off the couch and take action. And the financial mechanic has just given you this incredible toolbox of skills to actually implement this in your life. So run with it. All right. Again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.